Welcome to the 2021 New York State World Languages Professional Learning Series. My name is Candace Black, and I am your World Language Associate in the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages of the New York State Education Department. As you know, the New York State Board of Regents voted to adopt the revised learning standards in world languages at their March 15th meeting. This is a very exciting time for our profession, and we are honored and proud to be able to present this professional learning series to support educators as they plan to transition to these revised standards. This workshop is entitled From Skills to Mode, Standard 3, Presentational Communication. Building on the previous two presentations on Standard 1, Interpretive Communication, and Standard 2, Interpersonal Communication, the presenter will dive into the third New York State World Language Standard, Presentational Communication. Participants will explore ways in which to create real-world opportunities for students to share their proficiency in writing and speaking in the target language. We will also consider the importance of authentic audiences for student work and have the opportunity to brainstorm and share specific tasks for a variety of proficiency levels. Let's review a few housekeeping details. We have over 500 pre-registered attendees today, so we ask that you remain muted and that you reserve use of the chat for questions for the presenter or for when the presenter specifically instructs participants to use this feature. If you accidentally get disconnected, just reconnect or call me and I will assist you. My cell is on the confirmation email I sent you yesterday as well as today. Please note that this workshop is the third of four entitled From Skills to Modes. Dr. Joanne O'Toole presented the first workshop in this series called Standard 1, Interpretive Communication on March 10th, and Bill Heller presented the second called Standard 2, Interpersonal Communication on March 24th. The recordings for both of these workshops are now available on our website. Laura Terrell will offer the fourth workshop entitled From Skills to Modes, Planning for Learning, Integrating the Modes of Communication on May 19th from 4 to 5 p.m. Registration for this event is now open, and the link to the registration form is available on our World Languages Professional Learning site. Following this introduction, I will enter the link to the handouts folder in the chat. In this folder, you will find the revised standards, the themes and topics, proficiency ranges and performance indicators, crosswalks, and more. Within 24 hours of this event, those who attend this workshop in full will receive either a certificate of attendance or a certificate documenting CTLE credit. The type of certificate you will be receiving was indicated in the pre-workshop email you received from me yesterday. Within a week of this event, all attendees will receive a follow-up email with links to the updated workshop webpage, the handouts folder, including a PDF of the presentation, and the recording. This workshop is being recorded. The video will be uploaded to the World Languages Professional Learning website within about a week of this event. Those who are unable to attend this live webinar will be able to earn CTLE credit by viewing the video and answering 7 out of 10 questions on a post-assessment correctly. Before I introduce our presenter, I'd like to thank the following individuals for their help in assisting with this workshop: Laura Arpe, Andrea Diaz, Bill Heller, Jian Liu, and Dr. Joanne O'Toole. Our workshop presenter today is Dr. Lori Langer de Ramirez. Lori began her language teaching career as a teacher of Spanish, French, and ESL. She holds a master's degree in applied linguistics and a doctorate in curriculum and teaching from Teachers College, Columbia University. She is currently the Director of World and Classical Languages and Global Language Initiatives at the Dalton School in New York City. Lori is the author of books, texts, and articles about language teaching and learning and multicultural education. She presents workshops at local, regional, and national conferences and works with teachers in schools throughout the US and around the world. Her website, www.miscositas.com, offers free materials for teaching Chinese, English, French, and Spanish. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Lori to begin this workshop.
Thank you so much, Candy. How exciting to be here with everyone today after a long year. to really talk about some interesting topics and to build on the incredible work that my colleagues have already done. I'd like to reiterate that there is some really good resources online, and I invite you all to visit the New York State Ed website to kind of get a sense for all the work upon which this presentation is built. To start off, I would just like to signal to you these keys. You've seen these before if you if you were at the other two sessions. Please do mute your microphone throughout the session. Think when you see the blue thought bubble, that's your opportunity to think alone, think to yourselves, think about some of the things that we'll be sharing today. There will be an opportunity to write in the chat box. Please do, if you have questions, throw them out there and hopefully we can get to them before the end of the session. And this wonderful orange folder or yellow folder, this indicates materials, tremendous amounts of materials that will be available to you after this session that will help support your growth and your learning and your work in this area. As Candy said, we've gone through some really fantastic sessions. Today we'll be talking about Standard 3, Presentational Communication. And there is a part 4, so stay tuned. Please do join us on May 19th for part 4, Planning for Learning, Integrating the Modes of Communication. Okay, so let's have a look at the goals for the day. We're going to, they are in the form of I can or can do statements. So hopefully you'll be able to look at these and at the end, we'll revisit the same slide and hopefully you'll be able to say, yes, I can do these things. So you can interpret what is meant by the wording of the New York State World Language Standard 3, Presentational Communication. I can identify the key language functions of the New York State World Language Standard 3. I can explain the importance of real-world contexts in developing presentational tasks. I can explain the role of the audience in developing presentation tasks. And I can identify ways to meaningfully enact Standard 3 presentational communication. These are our goals for this afternoon, lofty goals. To talk about our standards, the revised New York State World Language Standards for Communication. Of course, we have 2 anchor standards. One is communication, and today, as I said, we'll be talking about presentational communication, Standard 3. We, of course, have our other anchor standards. Other anchor standard is cultures, and those 2 standards are relating cultural practices and products to perspectives and cultural comparisons. So looking at presentational communication, for presentational communication, we're really looking at output, students creating and output in the language. So what does that look like? Presentational communication is one-way communication. In essence, what I'm doing right now is presentational communication. I am speaking out, there is output, there is not an interaction between audience and the speaker, and at this moment at least. So this is really presentational. It's one-way communication without access to the interlocutor or to the audience response. It could be speaking, it could be writing, signing, or multimedia. There is an attention to the audience. So I need to take into consideration who is listening, or if I were writing, who is reading. And we're going to talk a lot about audience later on in the session. It can be on demand or polished. And if it is polished, there could be drafts, revision, and practice. So again, we're going to talk all about these characteristics of presentational communication today. So let's dive into the standard. The standard for presentational communication is learners present information and ideas on a variety of topics adapted to various audiences of listeners, readers, or viewers to describe, inform, narrate, explain, or persuade. Let's unpack that just a little bit. There's a lot there in that standard. So learners present information and ideas on a variety of topics. These are our contexts for communication. The contexts come out of our New York State World Language themes and topics. And here you have the revised themes and topics. with these 4 anchor themes and then underlying topics that go connected to each. So this may look a little bit different from the themes and topics we've been working with all along, right? So what do our old themes and topics look like? They were 15 discrete topics with subtopics planned and taught as 15 discrete units of instruction. So what has changed? Now we have those 4 overarching themes, each with associated topics intended to be integrated to create meaningful and interdisciplinary thematic units. So not quite as linear. You're not meant to be doing 15 discrete units and hit each one, but rather you're going to see a lot of interweaving of topics and themes. And I'm going to give you some examples later on to give you a sense for what that looks like. Back to the standard. So it is adapted to various audiences. As I said, we're going to focus a lot on audience today. And what's interesting about various audiences is that you have to have a sense for cultural knowledge to understand, to know if you are communicating effectively with different audiences, right? So right now I have to understand the audience today is fellow world language teachers, so I have to understand that audience. Now, your audience may be within the culture, and you see here students doing presentations for their classmates, students writing for their classmates, and so that is a shared culture. But oftentimes with presentational communication, it may be external to the student's culture, and here's where that cultural understanding comes in. So this requires adaptation and cultural understanding on the part of students to know, let's say they're communicating with key pals. Let's say they're communicating with students in another country. So they have to understand the cultural differences and cultural identities and adapt their communication accordingly. So this audience is an audience of listeners, readers, and viewers. This standard's a little challenging in the sense that we're focusing actually on the recipient, right? The listener, the reader, and the viewer, that's the audience, right? Again, it's that outward focused language skills. So we're talking about language that is heard, received, in the case of sign, read, and viewed. This means that our students who are doing presentational communication will be speaking, signing, writing, and a combination in the case of multimedia. Back to the standard. To describe, inform, narrate, explain, or persuade. And these are our language functions, and these are super important when looking at presentational communication. Let's unpack these functions for a moment. So again, the presentational language functions, meaning the purpose for using language: to describe, to inform, narrate, explain, or persuade. So what does it mean to describe? You can describe plans, you can describe places and things, summarize a scene. These are just examples, of course. There are many, many more examples that we could share. When you inform, you provide details, make a recommendation, give reasons. Narration. When you narrate, we tell stories. You're storytelling beings, right? Describe past actions, relate an anecdote. To explain, we summarize an idea, provide examples, make comparisons. And to persuade, convince someone, support a claim, advise against something. So these are all language functions, examples of language functions that are part of the standard. Let's have a look at some proficiency checkpoint ranges for the modern languages. For category 1 and 2 languages, we're looking at checkpoint A, novice mid to novice high. Checkpoint B, intermediate low to intermediate mid. And checkpoint C, intermediate mid to intermediate high. For the category 3 and 4 languages, we would have checkpoint A at novice mid to novice high, checkpoint B, novice high to intermediate low, and checkpoint C, intermediate low, intermediate mid. Let's take a peek at our classical languages and just really focus on presentational speaking and writing. Quick note, for classical languages, the presentational mode is standard 2, not standard 3. Those two modes, standard 2 and standard 3, are swapped for classical languages. For presentational speaking, we have checkpoint A at novice mid, checkpoint B at novice high, and checkpoint C at novice high as well. For presentational writing, checkpoint A at novice mid, checkpoint B at novice high, and checkpoint C at intermediate low. So let's have a look at what does it look like? What does it mean novice mid to novice high when you're talking about presentational proficiency expectations? What can a student do with this language? So for novice mid to novice high, a student can express himself with practiced and memorized expressions, simple sentences on familiar and everyday topics. Moving up to intermediate low or mid, there's still some simple sentences, maybe some series of sentences on a variety of familiar topics. So still familiar, but greater variety here for intermediate low to mid range. And moving up to intermediate mid to high, there are a series of sentences and connected sentences. You're starting to see some control of time frame and some concrete and maybe some researched topics. So you can see how that builds as proficiency grows. Here are our New York State World Language Performance Indicators. Those are provided for you in the folder, so please go have a look at those, organized by checkpoint and target range. So, quick beginning. Let's think, how have your understandings been confirmed, refined, or changed? Think about this for yourselves. What is presentational communication? What are some of the key language functions of presentational communication? And what are some proficiency expectations for presentational communication? That's fantastic. I see some confirmed, some refined. Wonderful. We're going to keep going and see if some concrete examples will help to refine that understanding even more. So what I wanted to share with you today when thinking about what are some big ideas to share with my colleagues today about presentational mode, I thought about these three, and we're going to look at some concrete examples that fall into these three big idea categories. The first one being real world contexts and tasks. So this is when your student might say to you, why are we doing this? Right? Or they may not say that. Sometimes they don't ask, but they're definitely thinking it. Why are we doing this? Right? The answer may not be, because it's on the test or because it's good for you, right? We want to think, what is a real world context and task that we can build and get students to be able to communicate in a presentational mode way? We're going to look at audience, authentic audiences. So the question is, who is this for? Very, very similar, tied to the real world context, right? Because normally if it's a real world context, the audience kind of comes along. But we're going to pay specific attention to authentic audiences, again, answering the question, who's this for? And then at the very end, we're going to talk a little bit about assessment. It's been a question that has popped up in some of these presentations, some of these workshops. And so we're going to dive very, very into the shallow end of assessment and answer the question, how do I know if I'm successful, right? So let's start. Why are we doing this? Let's look at some real world contexts and tasks. I'm going to start sharing some tasks with you, and we'll walk through each one and see how they connect and see how they answer this question. So why are we doing this? Well, to tell our stories. Here is an example of a checkpoint A task. This is actually a kindergarten class out of a thematic unit that might be called My Family and Pets. The anchor theme is identity and social relationships. The anchor topic is family and social relationships. And some of the language functions are give someone's name, give information, describe people and pets in your family. This is a seesaw activity, and students are doing this orally. So this is presentational speaking. Again, I am a story lover and a storyteller. And so another example for checkpoint A around stories, this is a comic strip task. This is around contemporary life and leisure. Although this really is the type of task that can be modeled around any topic that you're working on. Some of the language functions that students would accomplish here are narrate habitual actions, relate an anecdote, begin, continue, and end a story. And of course, these comic strips can be analog. I love a good paper hand-drawn comic strip, or you could be using digital tools to help students create and to present. And this is, of course, presentational writing. Let's move to checkpoint B. Why are we doing this? To share our identities. Nothing kids love more than to talk about who they are and their own identities, right? So this is a checkpoint B task around a thematic unit called Pura Vida in Costa Rica. So students are looking into their own identity. They are thinking about, they're actually researching words in other languages that mean something, that represent a philosophy or a way of life. And then they are finding one that means something for their own culture or to them. So they're presenting information, they're describing and characterizing people and making comparisons. This would be in the form of a poster, and it would be an oral presentation. So presentational speaking. Why are we doing this? To honor people and pets. So this is an activity, as a task called, part of a thematic unit, I should say, called Mi Ofrenda, part of a Day of the Dead unit. Students are looking at celebrations, customs, and traditions still around identity as the anchor theme. And they are creating an ofrenda about someone in their family who passed, and making a tribute to that person. They can choose someone who is famous. You can see the boy, the two boys here are sports fans. So we have an ofrenda to Wilt Chamberlain and an ofrenda to Bruce Lee. The top left is an ofrenda to a girl's grandparents, which is quite lovely. And the one on the bottom left is, of course, to a girl's dog who passed. And so in these ofrendas, they are describing someone they admire or love, listing things that person loved in life, and telling anecdotes. Why are we doing this? We're doing this to share what we have. This is a unit on the Biblioburro, and we're talking about school life and access to books and reading and education. Students did a fundraiser, raised money, purchased books to be sent to Colombia, to the Biblioburro, and to share with students in the town of La Gloria. And you can see the photo on the bottom where they received their books. The presentational task is for students to write a summary of the book that they're sharing and sending to Colombia, and to summarize the story, express their opinions about the story, and make observations. So basically tell the student who's receiving it why this is a great book and why they're going to love it. So that's a checkpoint B presentational writing task. Why are we doing this? To document our travels. Fantasy Trip is a wonderful thematic unit where you get students traveling virtually. And in this day and age, that's the way we're traveling. This is on the anchor theme of contemporary life. The anchor topic is travel.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help.
Students are describing their plans, describing places and things, and giving advice. And this is an interactive or a multimedia poster that they have prepared, and they will be doing some presentational speaking, again, to describe their plans and places and things. Moving to checkpoint C, why are we doing this? We're doing this to understand history. This is a thematic unit on Cesar Chavez and the labor movement. The anchor theme is global awareness and community engagement. The anchor topic is social justice and human rights. Students will be making suggestions, giving reasons. Each student has a role in this particular task, and their presentational speaking, they're speaking in the role of this person. So it is really a role play. They're making suggestions, impassioned pleas, giving reasons, and expressing opinions. So presentational speaking to understand history. And why are we doing this? We're doing this to protect our environment. This is a unit called a lot of axolotls. An axolotl is a Mexican salamander, or the ajolote in Spanish. Again, global awareness and community engagement is the anchor theme. For the anchor topic, we're looking at environmental issues and sustainability. Language functions here, students create a poster and a campaign to promote saving the axolotl. So they're arguing for saving an endangered animal, and you can swap in any animal that is connected to the target culture here. They are criticizing and persuading, criticizing the environmental challenges that have led up to the endangerment of this animal, and persuading their classmates to be involved and to care, right? So if you notice from all of these examples, there are anchor themes and anchor topics that were chosen, but they really cross over quite a number of them. And so you can interweave different ideas throughout. But these are some ways for you to think about that age-old question, teacher, why are we doing this? And they should be real-world answers to that question. Oh, I had one more. Why are we doing this? To fight for our rights. This is a unit called the Politics of Art. This is, again, around social justice and human rights. Students were asked to decide if they would travel to Spain because they were invited, they are artists, or if they were going to protest along with some protesters, some political issues in Spain. And so after a debate, students all decided in this group of artists that they are representing, they decided not to travel to Spain. And so they had to write this letter as a group. And so this is presentational writing. They are agreeing or disagreeing. There is some presentational speaking throughout this thematic unit and in different tasks where they express opinions, reject explanations, and debate. So some examples to consider in terms of that big question, why are we doing this? Now, very closely connected to this is the question, who is this for, right? So what are the authentic audiences that you want to consider as you design and develop tasks for presentational speaking and writing? The question, who is this for? What's more important than your friends in school, right? So the answer could be, this is for our friends. This particular task is a message wall. It is, you can have this up in your classroom. My students would come in a little bit early. They had some passing time and maybe they'd come in a minute or two early, and they would write messages to other classmates to see at different times. So it's presentational writing. They do not have access to somebody, to the reader. The reader's going to see it much later in the day. But the students are expressing likes, expressing dislikes, preferences. They may break some news to their classmates. They remind them of things. I had some students warn other students saying, the test is really hard today. So this is this presentational writing. It's checkpoint A. It could be very, very simple. Indeed, oftentimes it would just be things like, hi, see you later, right? But the audience here is other students, not the teacher. Who is this for? For our classmates. So this is a dream vacation task under the anchor theme of contemporary life and the anchor topic of travel. Students are they're writing postcards and sharing it on this wall, on this board, giving information, describing plans, making a recommendation, expressing likes and dislikes. So again, very, very, for checkpoint A language, students are able to produce that. And then of course the audience is other classmates, and you would provide other classmates the opportunity to read these postcards and perhaps respond in different ways. Checkpoint B, who is this for? This could be for other readers or users. This is a museum walkthrough. This is the Museo del Oro in Bogota, but it could be any museum in any target language, culture, or country. The anchor theme here is science, technology, and the arts, the anchor topic being the arts. And so this can take on two different forms. Either students can write a catalog of written review of the objects, the art objects in the museum for other students to read, other users, other visitors to this museum. Or which works out really wonderfully, is students can record. If you've ever gone to the Met or any museum, you know you can get those audio reviews of the audio tours of the museum. And so students, oftentimes higher proficiency students, can do this for other classes, right? So they can record a tour of a virtual museum or a museum that you set up in your room. They're describing art objects, telling where things are, describing the place, and making comparisons. So again, the audience here is other readers or other users or other visitors to this museum. Who is this for? This is for our Key Pals. Pen Pals? They used to be Pen Pals. I think they're Key Pals now. This is a virtual school tour. So under contemporary life and connected to school life and education, students will describe a place, in this case, their school, give their Key Pals a tour of the school, albeit virtually, tell where things are, express likes and dislikes and preferences. I've had students say things like, this cafeteria, the left side is the cool side and the right side is not cool, and things like this. So sharing information that is important to them with their Key Pals. So that audience is an authentic one because Key Pals are going to be watching this and get a sense for the school through the eyes of the students. Who is this for? It could be for younger students or younger community members, right? So this is a how-to video. Again, a higher proficiency student created this for younger students or lower proficiency students. This one is also about the arts. She is teaching students as part of a unit on Peru. She's teaching them how to make potato stamps. So when you carve out the potato and you can kind of decorate with them. So she's giving this how-to video for students. She's giving information, giving directions, telling someone what to do, reminding and reassuring them that they're doing a good job. So a great checkpoint B task. And again, the audience is other students to learn a new task or a recipe. Who is this for? For fellow travelers. This is part of a thematic unit that actually lasted an entire semester. Students took a semester abroad in Paris throughout an entire semester. This is in contemporary life, and travel is the anchor topic. This particular task involves students talking about their weekend. And so they had to give directions for where they went. They had to give reasons for having gone there, warn someone about something good or bad, make observations, relate an anecdote. And again, your fellow travelers, although this was an imaginary fantasy semester abroad, these kids really felt that they were in Paris for a semester. And so this information that they were sharing felt authentic to them, right? If the role play is deep enough, kids really go with it. So this is a checkpoint C, presentational speaking, or you can do it as writing as well. Who is this for? For potential followers. This is a unit about the politics of Latin America, and this particular task is called We Want You. Students were developing their own political parties after having studied political parties in Latin America, and they had to give speeches as the leaders of their party. They were telling someone what to do, they were complaining, agreeing, disagreeing, expressing opinions. So what you see here is an overview of what their particular political party looked like. And in the end, students, the audience, is meant to choose, right? So they had to really listen and be engaged and decide, where am I going to go? Which political party speaks to me? So again, the audience is engaged in an authentic way. Okay, so that was a lot to share. Let's have a look at what this looks like when it's put all together. So first, let's think about can-do statements here. We're going to lead with a language function, provide a communicative context. Can-do statements are written in learner-friendly language, so these are for your students after all. They are independent of proficiency level, and they are not task-specific at the unit level. Let's see what this looks like. So standard 3, presentational communication. We'll revisit this again. Learners present information and ideas on a variety of topics. Here's our context. adapted to various audiences. Remember that audience can be internal, can be connected to the students, or it could be external to the student in the case of a KPAL or an audience that does not share the student's culture, in which case the students will have to adapt and understand the culture in order to communicate effectively. Again, various audiences of listeners, readers, or viewers. Here are the skills. The skills are, of course, speaking, writing, or signing. To describe, inform, narrate, explain, or persuade. And again, here are the functions that we were talking about earlier. So some sample can-do statements by checkpoint. Let's look at checkpoint A. I can describe my travel highlights. This is a function. During a fantasy trip, here is your context. In an interactive poster presentation for younger students. So we have two things here. We have the skill and the cultural knowledge. In this case, the younger students, if they are connected to the student presenting, then they will be within that student's culture. If they are external or if they are the target culture community, they will need to understand some of the target culture to be able to communicate effectively. Okay, looking at checkpoint A, this is what we're talking about. Remember, we talked a little bit about these posters. Let's see what this entire connection of tasks looks like. As a reminder, I just shared a whole host of presentational tasks with you, but these would never be standalone. In fact, as I was even narrating through them, you heard me talk about students talking, students interacting. There might have been some interpretive tasks. There might be some interpersonal tasks. Let's see what this looks like all together, because presentational tasks never stand alone. So this is a checkpoint A series of tasks. Anchor theme is contemporary life. Anchor topic is travel. As an interpersonal task, students with a partner will look at a map and plan a fantasy trip to a target language speaking neighborhood or part of the world. As an interpretive task, students using a curated list of authentic materials, could be videos, blogs, students travel and experience the target culture and interpret those texts or videos and get some information. And the presentational task then comes in, as we saw earlier. Students create an interactive poster presentation of their trip and present highlights orally to an audience of future travelers, could be younger students, right? So here's a checkpoint A example where students have a suite of tasks that culminates in this presentational task. Let's look at a checkpoint B example. I can explain how a word or phrase, here's the function, explain, represents a philosophy, this is the context, in an essay from my class blog. And that is the skill and the cultural knowledge. If the class blog is their own class, that's the same culture. It could be a class blog that is then shared with key pals, in which case you have to understand the culture of the students who would be interpreting it. Let's see what it's like. Checkpoint B, the anchor theme is identity and social relationships. The anchor topic is identity. So for an interpretive task, students will read about the philosophy of pura vida in the novel Robo en la Noche. Another interpretive task, they will read an article about the philosophy of pura vida on a Costa Rican tourism board website. For an interpersonal task, students will discuss the article together in pairs. They will discuss the question or answer the question, is this like anything in our own culture? And then for the presentational task, they will write an article for their class blog explaining how a word or phrase from your own culture or a culture you know represents a philosophy of life. As you saw earlier, they could also create a poster about this word or phrase and discuss how this represents a philosophy of life. Let's look at checkpoint C. I can argue for, this is the function, the importance of saving an endangered species. This is the context. In a poster presentation to share with community members. So we've got skills here and then potentially cultural knowledge. So our anchor theme is global awareness and community engagement, the topic being environmental issues and sustainability. As an interpretive task, students will read an infographic, perhaps the one on the right. What are some environmental challenges that axolotls face? For an interpersonal task, they will contact an organization and communicate with an expert to find out ways to help. And then for a presentational task, design a poster presentation to inform and persuade community members to help fight for the protection of axolotls. Okay, so as I said earlier, we'll talk a little bit about assessment. It is definitely come up as questions. We all have questions about assessment. It's a long-term process. We are definitely exploring assessment, but for now, I thought I'd give you some ideas to be thinking about with regard to presentational tasks. So if a student says, how do I know if I'm successful? How do we assess for success? First and foremost, audience feedback, right? So if you have, again, tied to the real world task and to the audience, if you have an audience that is engaged and has tasks to accomplish during a presentational task of another student, that feedback is valuable and real, right? So they could, on a checkpoint A, they could be doing thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle, all sorts of gestures. You can have students writing answers to a question during presentations and giving feedback in that way. They could be taking notes. They could be highlighting things that they like. I have used Flipgrid or other, oh, not Flipgrid, it's another, I can't think of it right now, different tools to have students respond in real time and give feedback to students about what they liked and one thing maybe that they would recommend differently. Right? So that audience feedback, when you loop it into your task and make it a part of the task, can be a way for students to know if they've communicated effectively. In the case of the political parties, or in the case of the environment task, audience opinions are changed, right? So again, this ceases to be a task that is school-based and really just about students complying. It becomes something that they are passionate about. So when your students are really trying to change the hearts and minds of their audience, if they're changed, task accomplished, right? So that's where that authenticity of audience and real-world tasks ties together with assessment in a real way. Rubrics, use rubrics. I love one-point rubrics. I find them really helpful and students do as well. Have students, of course, access to the rubrics prior to the task. And then afterwards, I recommend sitting with them and going through the rubric bit by bit and have students ask questions and ask them to self-assess, ask them how they think things went and to really take ownership over that process as well. So let's revisit today's goals and see how far we've come. I can interpret what is meant by the wording of the New York State World Language Standard 3, Presentational Communication. I can identify the key language functions of New York State World Language Standard 3. I can explain the importance of real-world contexts in developing presentational tasks. I can explain the role of the audience in developing presentational tasks. And I can identify ways to meaningfully enact Standard 3 presentational communication. I hope very much that you're able to say yes to at least some of those. And at this point, I would love to reach out to my colleagues and ask if folks have some questions about Standard 3 or ideas about your major takeaways from Standard 3 presentational communication.
Hi, Lori. Great job. Thanks
Bill.
for sharing all these things. One question that came up was interesting. It was about how you were asking the students to output in the form of commands, but that wasn't necessarily the way the objective was written. The objective was written as a function. Maybe could you talk about the relationship between structure and function, and how that changes depending on your proficiency target?
Yeah. So when designing these tasks, you want to be looking at function, right? What is it that the student needs to accomplish? And so commands, a grammatical structure, may be what they need to be able to complete that function, right? But you wouldn't necessarily just say, this is the task that does commands, right? It always has to be tied to a function. So for example, in those tasks where it involves students persuading, commands are what you would use, right? So it's really looking first at the function and then the grammar follows. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. And then how the grammar is going to, how you meet that function is going to change by checkpoint. Like how you alluded to that, how you're going to persuade someone at checkpoint A is going to look different from how you're going to persuade someone at checkpoint C. The functions remain the same, but the structures we use to get there are different.
Absolutely.
Some people were asking also about some of the electronic digital tools that you use to do some of these presentational tasks. You have any favorites you'd like to talk about?
I do, and I forgot it before, but I remembered Padlet. Padlet is one that I've used with great effect when students are presenting, especially in this digital, right, in our boxes right now. I don't know that I'd use Padlet in real time for students to give feedback to other students during a presentation in the real world, but certainly online it served a great purpose. So students were able to make comments directly about what they were seeing in the presentation. Both, I usually ask students to say something that they loved and something that they might change or do differently.
Great, thanks. Joanne, do you have some questions that you've gleaned?
Yes, I do. One of the questions was around the availability of your politics and arts unit. So I just threw in the chat the link to your learner.org video. Would you like to talk about that briefly?
Sure. So I highly recommend the Annenberg series. It's on you can have a look at the link that Joanne kindly put in the chat. There are 30, actually more than 30 now, videos of wonderful classrooms around the country. Multiple checkpoints, multiple languages, really focusing on different tasks. Really, really exciting. The unit that task came from is a thematic unit called the Politics of Art. And in a nutshell, it was looking at a protest on the part of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Fernando Botero, and several other authors and artists from Colombia. They were protesting Spain, who had just changed their visa requirements. So requiring Colombians at that point to then have a visa where they didn't have to have one before. So the idea came about that this was a group of Pan-American artists. The group was fictitious, but the artists were not. And so my students were asked to contact real artists, living artists, and ask them their opinion about this, that if they were invited to Spain, would they protest alongside the Colombian artists and authors, or would they go because it's good for their career? And so this was set up a debate. So you can see there's a tremendous amount of different modes being hit here. They had to do some reading, so it's interpretive reading. There was debate, so there's some interpersonal speaking. And then of course, at the end, they sided with the protesters and wrote this protest letter as a group, as a class, to the government of Spain. And that required all sorts of different type of language, as you can imagine, writing an official letter like that versus a familiar letter, let's say, to a friend. So have a look at the video, but please look at all the other ones. They're really, really fantastic and great, lots of great information. Thank you for sharing that link, Joanne.
And there was a follow-up question about how do you make those kind of contacts to do a project like that?
Yeah. So this took a lot. This is where curation, and you know, we've talked a lot about curating authentic materials. This is where curation is really important. So this type of task takes some work on the part of the teacher to make sure that there are living artists who are willing to be contacted by high school students who will respond appropriately. And so it does take a little bit of sourcing and internet searching and finding, but I was able to find one artist per student ultimately that was willing to respond. It takes a while.
Another question someone asked was about how you handle key pals and how you start such an activity.
Oh, that's a great question. So key pals are one of those things that I find a lot more functional when you have a friend or a colleague or a friend of a friend, but some personal relationship with someone in another country. So if you're lucky enough to have that, that's great. If not, tap your colleagues and connect, see if you can make those connections. It tends to, in my experience, it tends to work better. There are organizations out there that are quite good and I can't think of names right now, but I can definitely put a list together where you can reach out and they will make those connections for you, and they'll even do the scheduling for you, which is one of the biggest challenges to doing key pals. I also, I like working with someone I know because I know that what's coming our way will be vetted and reviewed and okay to share with kids at different ages.
We had a question about student voice, and are there ways that you incorporate student voice in terms of some of these presentational tasks?
Yeah, absolutely. At multiple places. One that comes to mind initially is the Day of the Dead project, where students are creating ofrendas, giving students that choice to choose somebody they want to honor, being respectful of students, whether they want to honor somebody in their family and make it something personal. Some students don't feel comfortable that way, but they do feel really comfortable talking about somebody they really admire. And this is a great vehicle for doing that. And so it tends to engage students. And then of course, pets. Oftentimes kids don't have that place to talk about a pet that has gone on. And so in any of these tasks, the one about identity where students are choosing a word that either means something to them, in the case of aloha, for example, that student is just very drawn to Hawaiian culture, but is not Hawaiian herself. In the case of the student who chose shalom, he is a student of Jewish heritage and connected and has traveled to Israel. And so shalom had a personal connection to him in a very direct way. So giving students opportunities to kind of choose their topics, their themes, the way they express the task is really important, and also connects to that real world idea.
Related question was about bringing students' voice in designing the tasks.
Excellent. Yes. So a lot of times when you have kind of a frame of a thematic unit, you can put these ideas out to students and give multiple options. So for example, in the one of these units was connected to, you saw the Museo del Oro in Bogota. I had for their IPA at the end, their integrated performance assessment, there were multiple ideas, multiple tasks that they could choose. And then the last one was present one to the teacher, suggest something. And indeed, I always get students who will say, well, I'd like to do this other thing that I had never thought of. And so that type of dialogue with students is really important, giving them the opportunity to suggest their own path. And oftentimes you'll find students will take that path. And a lot of times they'll go even further than you ever expected. So I highly recommend that. It was a great question.
Lots of rave reviews, Lori, in the chat box. A lot of gratitude for the many examples that you shared with us. One participant shares the takeaway about your showing the interrelationship between the three modes, and you know, in our presentations, how we've really focused on how none of the modes stands alone. They're all interrelated. Maybe you'd like to elaborate on that idea a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So none of these tasks can really exist on its own. Just like you would never just, out of nowhere walk up to someone and kind of speak without interacting or without something happening before. So all of these tasks, and it's important to kind of set them up that way with students as well. Even though we have separated them out and we have these 3 different modes, they're always interrelated. And so presentational communication, for example, giving a speech on a topic doesn't come out of nowhere. It doesn't come out of a void. Students need to interpret text, video to get information. Ideally, they would have conversations with classmates, with teachers, with experts to really fill out their ideas and to kind of heighten them. And then the presentation can be more robust. And so these are always interrelated and connected. And that's why working with Joanne and Bill, these 3 presentations can really help you to see that interrelatedness and to always be thinking in terms of designing tasks that are rich, that connect to all these different modes, and that really connect to kind of those real world ideas for kids.
If there are no other questions, I want to thank Lori for a wonderful presentation, as well as Joanne and Bill and all of our other helpers in this presentation. I'm going to remind everyone that you'll receive your certificate, either attendance or CTLE, within 24 hours. I'll get us started on that tonight. And then in about a week, you'll get a follow-up email. It'll also have the link to the handouts folder, which I'm putting in the chat one more time here so that you have it. In that folder, we're going to put a PDF of this presentation, which wasn't there previously. So you'll get that. You'll also get the link to the recording. If you miss any of that, all of this information, the recording, the handouts folder, is going to be posted on our OBEWL Professional Learning webpage for world languages. So please visit that soon. On that note, I want to remind you that we do have a follow-up presentation that's going to take all the wonderful things that Joanne and Bill and Lori did, and they're going to teach you how to integrate the 3 modes of communication, and that's with Laura Terrell of Actifel fame. So if you haven't heard her speak, she's a wonderful speaker. That'll be on May 19th from 4 to 5 p.m., and it'll be available in the same format as you see right now. Lori, any final comments that you want to make?
I want to thank everyone for being here and applaud you all for being passionate educators of language and being here on Wednesday afternoon with all of us. It's a tribute to your passion and dedication. So bravo to all of you.
Well, thank you very much. With that, we're going to conclude this workshop, and we wish everyone a wonderful evening.